The rain started just before sunset. Not the gentle kind that taps softly against windows. This rain came down hard, angry, washing the city streets in silver and turning the sidewalks into mirrors of neon light. Cars splashed through puddles while people hurried under umbrellas, trying not to ruin expensive shoes or wrinkle-pressed suits. Across the street from the most luxurious restaurant in downtown Chicago, an old man stood quietly beneath a broken bus stop shelter. His coat was soaked. Mud stained the bottom of his pants. And the small leather bag, hanging from his shoulder, looked older than some of the buildings nearby. Most people walked past him without a second glance. A few looked at him with pity. Others looked away entirely. The glowing gold sign above the restaurant entrance reflected in the rainwater beside him. LeBlanc Mason, a place where wealthy businessmen closed million-dollar deals over wine that cost more than rent. A place where celebrities entered through private doors and politicians reserved tables months in advance. Nobody expected a man like him to walk inside. Especially not tonight. The old man adjusted his worn cap and checked the time on a scratched silver watch. 7:02 p.m. Right on time. He slowly crossed the street. Inside the restaurant, crystal chandeliers shimmered like stars. Soft piano music floated through the air while waiters in perfectly pressed uniforms moved gracefully between tables. Everything smelled expensive. Butter, wine, fresh bread, perfection. At the front desk stood Ethan, 26 years old. Sharp jawline, perfect hair, and the kind of smile employees practiced in mirrors because rich customers tipped better when they saw it. He noticed the old man the moment the doors opened, and immediately frowned. Water dripped from the stranger's coat onto the polished marble floor. Several guests turned to stare. One woman whispered something to her husband and laughed quietly. Ethan stepped forward before the man could say a word. "Sir," he said politely but coldly, "I think you may have the wrong place." The old man looked around calmly. "No," he replied softly, "I'm exactly where I need to be." His voice was steady, confident. That surprised Ethan. Still, appearances mattered here. And this man looked like he belonged in a cheap roadside diner, not one of the finest restaurants in the city. Ethan forced a tighter smile. "We have a dress code." The old man glanced down at his muddy boots. "That so?" "Yes, sir." A few nearby guests pretended not to listen, while clearly enjoying every second of the embarrassment. The old man nodded slowly. "I'm here for dinner." Ethan crossed his hands in front of him. "I'm afraid all reservations are full." "That's strange," the man replied. "I reserved the entire restaurant." A couple at the nearest table burst into laughter. Ethan almost smiled himself. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "please don't make this difficult." The old man reached into his coat pocket. Ethan expected crumpled bills. Maybe a bus pass. Instead, the man pulled out a simple black card. No logo. No name. Just matte black metal. Ethan stared for a second. He had never seen a card like it before. Still, pride pushed him forward. "I can recommend somewhere more affordable nearby." The old man's expression didn't change. "I didn't ask for affordable." The tension in the lobby thickened. At a nearby table, a teenage boy secretly recorded with his phone. Moments like this spread fast online. Rich restaurant humiliates poor old man. People loved that kind of drama. Ethan was beginning to lose patience. "Sir, I need you to leave." The old man looked him directly in the eyes for the first time. And something about that gaze made Ethan unexpectedly uncomfortable. Not angry. Not emotional. Just disappointed. Like a teacher watching a student fail an easy test. "Tell me something," the old man said quietly. "Do you always judge people before speaking to them?" Ethan straightened his tie. I'm doing my job. No, the old man replied. You're protecting your assumptions. Before Ethan could respond, another voice suddenly cut through the lobby. What's going on here? The room instantly fell silent. Marcus Reed, the restaurant's general manager, emerged from the hallway near the kitchen. Tall, gray suit, perfect posture. A man known for firing employees over tiny mistakes. His eyes moved from Ethan to the soaked old man standing near the entrance. And then something shocking happened. Marcus froze. Completely froze. The color drained from his face. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Marcus hurried forward so quickly he nearly slipped on the marble floor. Sir, he whispered. The old man gave a small nod. Good evening, Marcus. Every waiter nearby stared in confusion. Ethan blinked. You know him. Marcus looked horrified. Know him. Then he turned toward Ethan with panic burning in his eyes. Do you have any idea who this man is? Ethan suddenly felt his stomach tighten. The old man calmly removed his wet coat. Marcus himself took it carefully, almost respectfully. This, Marcus said slowly, is Mr. Adrian Laurent. Silence. A fork dropped somewhere in the dining room. The name hit the staff like lightning. Adrian Laurent. The billionaire investor nobody ever saw publicly. The man who owned hotels across Europe, luxury resorts in Dubai, and private vineyards in France. The man whose company had quietly purchased LeBlanc Mason 6 months earlier. The owner. Ethan's face turned pale. No, he whispered. The teenage boy recording lowered his phone in shock. Adrian looked around the restaurant quietly. I see business is good. Marcus swallowed nervously. Yes, sir. Adrian's eyes shifted back toward Ethan. But hospitality seems to have declined. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. A woman at table 7 suddenly looked very interested in her wineglass. The entire restaurant had gone silent now. Every customer watching. Every waiter frozen. Adrian stepped closer to Ethan. Not aggressively. Not cruelly. That somehow made it worse. You saw an old coat, Adrian said calmly. Mud on boots, rainwater on the floor. Ethan's hands trembled slightly. I didn't know. That's the problem, Adrian interrupted softly. You decided who I was before you knew anything at all. Marcus looked ready to faint. Sir, I assure you this does not represent our values. Adrian raised one hand gently. It represents exactly your values, he said. Nobody breathed. Adrian turned toward the dining room. When people have money, he said quietly, everyone smiles. Everyone opens doors, everyone offers respect. His eyes moved slowly across the guests. But when someone appears poor, he continued, the truth comes out. The restaurant suddenly felt colder. Smaller. Several customers avoided eye contact entirely. Because deep down, many of them had silently judged him too. Adrian looked back at Ethan. What's your name? Ethan, sir. How long have you worked here? 2 years. And before this? Ethan hesitated. A diner in South Side. Adrian nodded slowly. Interesting. Then you should remember what it feels like to be ignored. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Ethan's chest tightened. Because he did remember. The unpaid bills. His mother working double shifts. Customers snapping fingers at her like she was invisible. He remembered all of it. So when had he become this person? Adrian studied him quietly, as if asking the same question. Finally, Adrian spoke again. Bring me a table. Marcus immediately rushed forward. Of course, sir. The private room is ready. No. Adrian looked around the crowded dining hall. I'll sit out here. Whispers spread instantly. Customers straightened in their seats. Some suddenly smiled at Adrian, as if they had respected him the entire time. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He sat at a small table near the center of the room. The same table Ethan had refused to offer minutes earlier. Marcus pulled out the chair personally. "Would you like the chef's special tonight, sir?" Adrian picked up the menu slowly. "I'd like Ethan to serve me." The entire staff froze again. Ethan looked terrified. Marcus looked even worse. "Sir, perhaps another waiter would provide better." "No," Adrian replied calmly. "Ethan will do." For a moment, Ethan considered quitting on the spot. Walking out. Disappearing. But something in Adrian's expression stopped him. Not anger. Not revenge. Something else. Something heavier. Disappointment. And strangely, curiosity. As if Adrian was trying to understand him. Ethan approached the table carefully. His confidence from earlier had completely vanished. Hands shaking slightly, he poured water into Adrian's glass. A few drops spilled onto the tablecloth. "Sorry," Ethan muttered. Adrian looked at him calmly. "Are you nervous now because you know I'm wealthy?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes." "Why?" "Because wealthy people could destroy lives with one sentence. Because Marcus was probably already planning to fire him. Because everyone was watching." But Ethan couldn't say any of that. Instead, he whispered, "I made a mistake." Adrian nodded slightly. "Yes," he said, "you did." The silence stretched. Then Adrian closed the menu. "I'll have tomato soup," he said. Ethan blinked. "Just soup?" "Yes." "That's all." Adrian gave a faint smile. "Funny, isn't it?" "What?" "You assumed I came here to spend money." Ethan stood speechless. Because once again, Adrian was right. As Ethan walked toward the kitchen, whispers exploded across the restaurant. People pulled out phones. Some customers recognized Adrian now. A billionaire dining alone in the middle of the restaurant after being insulted by staff. By morning, the story would be everywhere online. Inside the kitchen, Marcus grabbed Ethan aggressively. "What were you thinking?" he hissed. "I didn't know who he was." That's exactly the point. Chefs pretended not to listen while absolutely listening. Marcus rubbed his forehead in panic. If he reports this to corporate, we're finished. Ethan looked toward the dining room window. Adrian sat alone, calmly sipping water, while wealthy guests secretly stared at him. "He's not angry," Ethan whispered. Marcus looked stunned. "Not angry. Ethan, men like him don't get angry." He lowered his voice further. "They decide." And somehow, that sounded much worse. Ethan prepared the soup tray carefully. Every step back toward Adrian's table felt heavier than the last. When he arrived, Adrian was looking out the rain-covered windows thoughtfully. Ethan placed the soup down gently. "Your soup, sir." Adrian nodded once, then asked quietly, "Do you know why I bought this restaurant?" Ethan shook his head. "No." Adrian picked up the spoon. "Because 32 years ago," he said softly, "I washed dishes here." Ethan stared at him. "What?" "This place used to be very different. Smaller, family-owned. I was 19. For the first time all evening, Adrian's voice carried emotion. "Back then, I couldn't afford dinner here either." Ethan sat frozen. "One night," Adrian continued, "I came in soaking wet from the rain after my shift ended. The hostess told me customers didn't want to look at poor people while eating." Ethan felt sick, because he had done almost the exact same thing. Adrian stirred the soup slowly. "But the owner invited me to sit anyway." A faint smile touched his face. "He served me tomato soup for free." The room around them seemed to disappear. "All these years later," Adrian said quietly, "I still remember how that kindness felt." Ethan's throat tightened painfully. And then Adrian looked up directly into his eyes. So tell me something, Ethan. His voice remained calm. But the question hit like a hammer. When did kindness become weakness? When did kindness become weakness? The question stayed, hanging in the air long after Adrian Lawrence stopped speaking. Ethan stood frozen beside the table, gripping the serving tray so tightly his knuckles turned white. Around them, expensive conversations had died completely. Nobody cared about steak anymore. Nobody cared about wine. The entire restaurant was listening. Rain rolled slowly down the giant windows, while soft piano music continued in the background, almost painfully elegant against the tension in the room. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again, because he didn't have an answer. Not a real one. Adrian looked back down at his soup and took another calm spoonful. You know what's interesting, he said quietly. People think power changes you. His eyes moved across the restaurant. But power usually just reveals who you already were. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman near the bar slowly lowered his phone after secretly recording. Adrian noticed everything. Ethan finally found his voice. I'm sorry, sir. Adrian nodded once. I believe you are. That surprised Ethan. No anger. No threats. No humiliation. Somehow that made the guilt even worse. Marcus hurried toward the table again, sweating beneath his collar. Sir, he said nervously, your private dining room is fully prepared. We also arranged complimentary wine and... Adrian interrupted gently. Marcus. Yes, sir. How long have you managed this restaurant? 8 years. And in those 8 years, Adrian asked calmly, how many customers have walked through those doors dressed like me tonight? Marcus hesitated. Very few. And how many received a warm welcome? The manager said nothing. Because there was no good answer. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. That silence tells me everything. Near the kitchen entrance, several younger waiters exchanged nervous glances. Some looked ashamed. Others looked scared. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. This wasn't just Ethan's mistake. It was the culture of the entire restaurant. A place where rich people received smiles before speaking, while ordinary people had to earn basic respect. Adrian folded his napkin carefully. When I first bought this place, he said, I told the board one thing. Marcus swallowed hard. Adrian continued. I said luxury should never mean arrogance. The words echoed through the dining room. A woman at table 4 slowly looked down at her plate, embarrassed. Earlier she had laughed when Ethan tried removing Adrian from the entrance. Now she couldn't even look at him. Adrian noticed that too. He noticed everything. Ethan stood silently beside the table, shame burning in his chest. Finally, Adrian looked back at him. Sit down. Ethan blinked. Sir. Sit. Marcus nearly choked. Sir, employees aren't allowed to sit with guests. I know the rules, Adrian replied calmly. Marcus immediately went quiet. Every eye in the restaurant followed Ethan as he slowly sat across from the billionaire owner. It felt unreal. 10 minutes ago, he had tried throwing this man out into the rain. Now he sat across from him at the center of the restaurant while everyone watched. Adrian studied him carefully. You said you worked in a diner before this. Yes, sir. How was the pay? Bad. Hours. Long. Adrian nodded knowingly. And your family? Ethan hesitated. My mom still works there. Double shifts. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. How did you know? Adrian gave a faint smile. Because mine did too. Silence. For the first time all night, Ethan stopped seeing a billionaire and started seeing a man. An old man who remembered every painful detail of being poor. Adrian rested his hands together. "Tell me honestly," he said, "why did you treat me that way?" Ethan stared at the table. At first, pride told him to defend himself. Dress code. Policy. Standards. But none of that was true anymore. So he answered honestly. "Because I thought you didn't belong here." Adrian nodded slowly. There it is. The truth sounded uglier out loud. Ethan rubbed his palms together nervously. "When I first started working here," he admitted quietly, "I promised myself I'd never be poor again." Adrian listened silently. "So I changed everything, the way I talked, dressed, acted." Ethan laughed bitterly. "I guess, after a while, I started looking down on people who reminded me of the life I escaped." That hit harder than anyone expected. Even Marcus looked stunned. Because Ethan wasn't evil. He was insecure. And insecurity often becomes cruelty when mixed with pride. Adrian's expression softened slightly. That happens more than people realize. Ethan looked up. "You ever feel that way?" Adrian smiled faintly. "When I was young, constantly." He glanced around the luxurious restaurant. The poor often believe money will finally earn them respect. His eyes became distant for a moment. But some people become rich only to discover they still feel small inside. The room stayed completely silent. Nobody wanted to interrupt him, because every word felt painfully real. Adrian reached into his pocket slowly and removed an old photograph. The edges were worn from time. He placed it on the table between them. Ethan picked it up carefully. It showed a tiny restaurant kitchen from decades ago. A skinny teenage boy stood beside a sink full of dishes. Wet apron. Messy hair. Tired eyes. "Adrian." "You kept this?" Ethan asked quietly. "For 32 years. Why?" Adrian looked at the photo thoughtfully. "To remind myself who I was before success." His voice lowered slightly. "Because forgetting that person is dangerous." Ethan stared at the picture again. It suddenly became impossible to connect the teenage dishwasher to the billionaire sitting across from him. But maybe that was the point. Most people only respected success after it became visible. Nobody respected the struggle. Adrian leaned forward slightly. "Do you know the saddest part about tonight?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "You're not the first employee to do this." Marcus looked horrified. "Sir, I've visited anonymously 6 times this year." The restaurant froze. Different clothes, different entrances, different times. Adrian's voice remained calm. And every single time, staff treated wealthy-looking guests better than ordinary ones. Marcus turned pale. Adrian continued. One hostess ignored an elderly couple for 20 minutes because they looked poor. A waiter near the bar suddenly looked terrified. Another employee quietly stared at the floor. A busboy mocked a delivery driver in Spanish, assuming nobody understood him. The busboy's face drained of color instantly. Adrian did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. Truth was heavier than shouting. Marcus finally spoke carefully. "Sir, we can retrain the staff immediately." Adrian looked at him. Retraining behavior without changing values is useless. Marcus had no response. Because again, Adrian was right. Across the room, a little girl sitting with her parents tugged softly on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Why were they mean to him? The mother looked embarrassed. But Adrian smiled gently toward the child. Children always saw things adults complicated. The girl asked another question. "Are you really the owner?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." Her eyes widened. "But you don't look rich." Several guests looked uncomfortable again. Adrian chuckled softly. "And what does rich look like?" The girl thought carefully. My dad says rich people wear expensive watches. A few people laughed nervously. Adrian slowly removed his old scratched silver watch. This watch cost $20. The girl looked confused. Then why do you wear it? Adrian's eyes softened. My mother gave it to me before she died. Suddenly, nobody laughed anymore. The little girl smiled. I like it better than shiny watches. Adrian placed a hand over his heart dramatically. Well, he said warmly, that makes two of us. Even Ethan smiled slightly. For the first time that night, the tension eased. But only for a moment. Because then Adrian stood up. And the entire restaurant immediately went silent again. Marcus straightened nervously. Adrian looked around the room slowly. When my mother worked double shifts cleaning offices, he said calmly, people barely looked at her. His voice carried through the restaurant effortlessly. But she taught me something important. He paused. She said the true character of a person is revealed by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their food. Tonight, Adrian continued, many of you failed that test. Several customers looked deeply uncomfortable now, especially those who had laughed earlier. Adrian turned toward Marcus. How many reservations tomorrow night? Marcus swallowed. Completely full, sir. Cancel them. The room exploded into whispers. Marcus blinked in panic. Sir, every reservation. But that would cost hundreds of thousands in losses. I'm aware. Adrian looked toward the kitchen. Tomorrow this restaurant will not serve wealthy guests. Now even the chefs were staring. Adrian continued calmly. Instead, every table will be reserved for homeless shelters, sanitation workers, delivery drivers, nurses, janitors, and anyone else this city overlooks every day. Complete silence. Then slowly, a waiter near the kitchen began clapping. Everyone turned. It was Miguel, an older dishwasher who barely spoke during shifts. One clap became two. Then another employee joined. Then another. Soon the sound spread across the restaurant like thunder. Some guests remained awkwardly silent. Others stood and applauded too. Ethan felt his throat tighten emotionally. Because for the first time since working here, the restaurant actually felt human. Marcus looked completely overwhelmed. But sir, he said quietly, who will pay for all of that? Adrian smiled faintly. I will. Then he looked directly at Ethan. And Ethan will help organize it. Ethan's eyes widened. Me? Yes. After what I did. Adrian stepped closer. One mistake should teach you, he said quietly, not define you. Those words hit Ethan harder than anything else that night. Not because they were dramatic. Because nobody had ever given him grace after failure before. Adrian placed money on the table for the soup. Ethan stared at it. Sir, you don't need to pay. Adrian smiled. The soup isn't free anymore. Ethan looked confused. Adrian's eyes twinkled slightly. Inflation. For the first time all night, the entire restaurant laughed together. Even Marcus. Adrian picked up his old coat. The muddy boots. The worn leather bag. All the things people judged him for. And suddenly, those things looked more dignified than every designer suit in the room. Before leaving, Adrian stopped beside Ethan one last time. Tomorrow morning, he said calmly, be here at 6. Yes, sir. We have tables to prepare. Ethan nodded. Adrian started walking toward the exit. But just before reaching the door, he turned slightly. One more thing. Everyone waited. Adrian looked around the restaurant one final time. Never make someone prove their worth before offering them kindness. Then he stepped back into the rain. The doors closed softly behind him. And nobody in the restaurant spoke for several seconds. Because deep down, Every single person knew they had just witnessed something they would never forget. Something bigger than money, bigger than status. A reminder that respect should never depend on appearance. And for Ethan, it was the night that changed his life forever.